My brother handed me 5 humiliating conditions I had to obey just to attend his wedding. Complete them and maybe you will be worthy of standing beside us, he sneered. I laughed, booked a flight to Bali, and sent one final gift. When he opened it in front of every guest, his face went completely white. My name is Gia. I am 33 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a crisis public relations consultant, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale lunch to catch up. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The air conditioning inside the country club was set to a freezing temperature. It was the exact temperature of my family's affection. We were seated at a corner table positioned perfectly to overlook the pristine 18th hole. The faint clinking of heavy silverware against fine bone china echoed through the expansive room. My older brother Declan sat across from me. He wore a tailored Italian suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Beside him sat his fiancée Iman. Iman was an African-American woman from an influential political family in Washington, D.C. Her father was a powerful senator. Iman was completely unwilling to make eye contact with me. She stared intently at her sparkling water, adjusting the massive diamond ring on her hand. I had spent my entire life playing the role of the family embarrassment. My parents prized conformity status and public perception above all else. He was a vice president of wealth management who drove a leased Porsche he treated like a firstborn. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. My family firmly believed I merely ran social media accounts for local diners and scraped by in a tiny apartment. They saw a nobody. They had absolutely no idea I actually ran the most elite crisis public relations firm on the East Coast, managing reputations for billionaires and politicians. They never cared enough to ask. Declan reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. He did not even say hello. He simply slid a thick piece of expensive cardstock across the tablecloth toward me. "Read it," he commanded. His voice was flat, carrying the lazy arrogance of a man who had never been told no. I picked up the heavy paper. The words were printed in elegant calligraphy. Rule number 1. Cover your small wrist tattoo with heavy theatrical concealer. It is trashy. Rule number 2. Dye your hair a respectable dark brown to cover your highlights. You look unprofessional. Rule number 3. Do not initiate conversation with Iman's senator father or any of our VIP guests under any circumstances. Rule number 4. If asked by anyone, tell people you are my administrative assistant. Do not mention your embarrassing online job. Rule number 5. Pay the $15,000 catering bill for the rehearsal dinner to earn your plate at the wedding. I read the words again. Earn your plate. It was an ultimatum. It was a demand for my absolute humiliation. Iman finally looked up, taking a delicate sip of her water. We have an image to maintain, Gia, she said, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of human warmth. My family is flying in from D.C. We have senior congressional aides attending. We have massive campaign donors attending. We cannot have you looking like a bohemian tragedy and making my father uncomfortable. Your aesthetic is a liability to our brand. Before I could formulate a response, my mother Patricia leaned forward. Her heavy pearl necklace clicked sharply against the edge of the mahogany table. Just do it, Gia, she sighed. You ruined Declan's college graduation by wearing that cheap thrift store dress. We let that slide because you did not know any better. But Iman's family is American royalty. We absolutely cannot have you embarrassing us again. You need to fall in line. You need to act like a normal, respectable person for once in your life. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had spent decades treating me like a dark stain on her otherwise perfect, glossy life. I looked at my brother, whose breathtaking arrogance was matched only by his profound hidden incompetence. I did not cry. I did not scream. I was entirely, completely, and dangerously calm. I picked up the thick cardstock. My fingers moved methodically. I folded the top corners down. I creased the edges sharply, running my thumbnail along the heavy paper. I folded it again in half. Then I folded the wings, creating perfect symmetry. Under the shocked, silent gaze of my mother, my brother, and his flawless fiancé, I crafted a perfect paper airplane out of their ridiculous, insulting demands. "Gia, what on earth are you doing?" Patricia hissed, her eyes darting frantically around the dining room to see if any other country club members were watching our table. I looked Declan directly in the eye. I dropped the paper airplane directly into Declan's crystal goblet of ice water. The expensive cardstock began to soak up the freezing liquid. "I will save you the embarrassment, Declan," I said. "Keep your $15,000 bill. I will not be attending." I stood up from the table, smoothed my dress, and walked away. I walked out the heavy glass doors into the bright, blinding afternoon sun, finally free from their toxic grip. As I stepped onto the pristine concrete of the valet area, my phone vibrated intensely in my purse. It was an encrypted notification. Alert. Wire transfer of $2.5 million intercepted from Declan's offshore account. Status frozen. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as I requested a ride to the airport. He had absolutely no idea he was already losing everything. The tropical sun beating down on the pristine white sand beaches of Bali was a stark contrast to the freezing, suffocating atmosphere of the country club I had finally left far behind in America. I sat on the expansive wooden deck of my private oceanfront villa, listening to the gentle, rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I was not crying, I was not sulking, I was not mourning the loss of a family that had never truly loved me. I was completely focused. I had two encrypted laptops open on the teak table in front of me, shielded from the bright glare of the sun by a massive canvas umbrella. I took a very slow, highly deliberate sip of my iced coconut water. The sweet, refreshing taste was the perfect complement to the absolute silence of my surroundings. My personal phone, sitting face down next to my laptops, had been vibrating violently and continuously for the past 12 hours. The family group chat was going absolutely nuclear. I finally picked it up, unlocking the screen just to observe the sheer, unadulterated panic unfolding across the digital space. Patricia had sent 30 separate messages. "You selfish, ungrateful brat," her last text read. "Declan's caterer is threatening to cancel the entire rehearsal dinner. Pay the $15,000 right now. You owe him for letting you live in his shadow without kicking you out. Send the wire immediately or do not ever come home." I read the words. I read the desperate, toxic manipulation trying to reach across the ocean to choke me. I did not feel even a single ounce of guilt. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical resolve. I swiped the notification away and closed the personal application. I turned my attention back to the glowing screens of my work laptops. I initiated a secure encrypted video conference call. Within seconds, the screen populated with the sharp, focused faces of the 6 senior directors at my crisis management firm. These were some of the most ruthless, brilliant, and highly paid legal and public relations minds on the entire East Coast. They did not know me as a disappointment. They did not know me as a failure. They knew me as the CEO who had built an entire empire from the ground up, the woman who commanded 7-figure retainers to make impossible scandals disappear overnight. "Good morning, team," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative. "Let us review the situation regarding the Washington operation." My lead investigative director, a former intelligence officer named David, nodded sharply. "We have fully verified the financial anomalies, Gia. The offshore accounts tied to your brother are completely empty. But the real issue is the secondary discovery. In his desperate attempt to fake his billionaire status for his new in-laws, Declan did not just drain his personal funds. He actively hacked into the charitable foundation overseen by Iman's father. The magnitude of his stupidity was breathtaking. Iman's father was a sitting United States senator, a man whose entire political brand was built on ethics, transparency, and old money philanthropy. Declan had siphoned $400,000 directly from a charity meant for underprivileged youth in the capital, routing it through shell companies to pay for his absurd, extravagant wedding venues and diamond rings. "The senator is completely unaware of the breach," David continued, his face grim. "But the federal auditors are not. They flagged the discrepancies 2 weeks ago. The FBI is already quietly building an indictment for wire fraud and embezzlement. When the arrest happens, the senator's political career will be instantly obliterated by association. The media will absolutely crucify him for bringing a criminal into his inner circle. I looked at the data flowing across my second screen. I saw the undeniable hard proof of my brother's catastrophic arrogance. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his fake reality. "We are not going to let the senator take the fall for Declan's crimes," I instructed my team, leaning forward. "I want a full, comprehensive survival strategy drafted for the senator by tonight. Prepare a massive press release. Draft the legal severance documents. We are going to hand the senator the exact playbook he needs to save his family's name by serving Declan to the federal authorities on a silver platter. I want the documents bound in a secure biometric briefcase." My legal director smiled a sharp, predatory expression. "Consider it done, Gia. We will have the package ready for immediate delivery." I ended the secure call, closing the laptop with a satisfying, sharp click. The ocean breeze washed over the deck, warm and invigorating. I had spent my life being told I was a liability, an embarrassment, a problem that needed to be managed and hidden away. Now I was the only person standing between a powerful political dynasty and total irreversible ruin. I was holding the keys to their survival, and I was going to deliver them directly to the man who thought I was not worthy of speaking to him. My personal phone vibrated again, breaking the silence. This time it was a direct text message from Declan. I opened it, watching the desperate, frantic words appear on the screen. "The catering check bounced," he wrote. "The venue manager is threatening to call the police for fraud. Iman is crying in the bathroom. Dad is screaming at the bank. Wire me the money, Gia. I know you have something saved up. Please, just send it now. I will pay you back after the wedding. I promise." I stared at the message. I saw the crumbling of his entire world happening in real time. The golden boy was finally facing the consequences of his actions, and he was desperately begging the sister he had humiliated to save him. I did not type a response. I did not offer reassurance. I simply turned off the device, completely picked up my sunglasses, and walked down the wooden steps toward the inviting, crystal-clear water of the infinity pool, ready to swim. The extravagant wedding ceremony was scheduled to occur in exactly 48 hours, and the real fireworks had not even begun. While I reclined on a plush sunbed overlooking the Indian Ocean with a salted margarita in hand, absolute disaster was unfolding at an exclusive oceanfront estate in the Hamptons. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be the ultimate showcase of Declan's fabricated wealth. Crystal lanterns hung from the branches of ancient oak trees, casting a warm, romantic glow over the manicured lawns. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos carried silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. It was a flawless picture of high society elegance, right up until the head caterer approached my brother's table with the final invoice. Declan had tried to slip the man his platinum credit card, discreetly hoping to handle the transaction without drawing any attention from the surrounding politicians and socialites. I knew exactly what happened next, because my security team had intercepted the venue's financial logs. The card declined. Declan swiped a second card. It declined. He pulled out a third card with shaking hands. It declined as well. The caterer was a man who catered exclusively to billionaires and had absolutely zero tolerance for insufficient funds. He did not lower his voice when he informed my brother that the entire raw bar would be packed up and removed if a payment of $15,000 was not secured immediately. The frantic murmurs began to ripple through the wealthy crowd. Iman was busy taking photographs near the elaborate floral archways, completely oblivious to the financial meltdown happening just yards away. But her mother was not oblivious at all. Beatrice was a formidable Washington socialite who could spot financial weakness from a mile away. She moved through the crowd with predatory grace and cornered my mother near the towering champagne fountain. Her voice was perfectly level, but laced with pure venom, as she demanded to know why the caterers were actively dismantling the ice sculptures. "I thought your son was a vice president of wealth management," Beatrice stated loudly, deliberately, making sure her political allies standing nearby could hear every single word. Is there a reason my daughter's rehearsal dinner is being repossessed before the main course has even been served? Patricia's face turned a violent, blotchy shade of red. She stammered out a frantic, poorly constructed lie about a bank fraud alert. She claimed the bank had temporarily locked Declan's accounts because of a suspicious international wire transfer error. She assured Beatrice it was just a temporary security measure and promised the bill would be settled in exactly 5 minutes. Sweating profusely and visibly shaking, my mother grabbed her designer clutch and sprinted toward the estate's luxurious guest bathrooms, desperate to find a hiding place where she could make a phone call. My phone rang just as I was signaling the villa staff for a second margarita. It was a FaceTime video call from Patricia. I answered it immediately, holding the phone up high so she could get a crystal clear view of the sprawling tropical paradise behind me. My mother looked completely unhinged. Her carefully styled hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and the harsh bathroom lighting highlighted the sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes. "Gia," she hissed, her voice echoing off the marble tiles of the bathroom stall. "You need to wire $15,000 to Declan right this second. The bank locked his accounts and the caterer is threatening to leave. Everyone is staring at us. Iman's mother is asking humiliating questions. Do not play games with me today, just pay the bill." She was not asking. Even in her most desperate moment, she was still commanding me. She was still treating me like the family stepping stool, the reliable backup plan they could walk all over and then discard. I took a very slow sip of my drink, letting the heavy silence stretch between us until her arrogant panic morphed into genuine suffocating fear. "Please, Gia," she begged, her voice finally cracking under the weight of her impending social ruin. "They are going to cancel the wedding." I looked directly into the camera, maintaining a perfectly composed expression. "Rule number 4 said I was just an assistant, Mom," I said smoothly. "Assistants do not have $15,000 lying around to bail out their wealthy bosses. You wanted me to know my place. I know my place perfectly well now." I tapped the red button and ended the call, instantly blocking her number for the next 24 hours to ensure absolute silence. Back in the Hamptons, my mother emerged from the bathroom empty-handed and pale as a ghost. Declan was standing near the edge of the estate gardens, his face buried in his hands. He had no other options left. The fake billionaire had finally run out of other people's money to spend. With the caterer loudly threatening to make a public announcement to the guests about the unpaid bill, Declan was forced to do the one thing he had dreaded his entire life. He walked over to Iman's father, the senator. In front of several high-ranking congressional members and powerful donors, my brother had to quietly, pathetically ask his future father-in-law for a $15,000 loan just to save the dinner. The senator did not shout. He did not cause a scene. He simply pulled out an exclusive black credit card and handed it to the caterer, settling the debt instantly without a single word of complaint. But the damage was permanently and irreversibly done. The senator looked at my brother with a gaze so incredibly cold and suspicious it could have frozen boiling water. While Declan scurried away to comfort a now furious and humiliated Iman, the senator stepped away from the crowd and retreated to the quiet shadows of the garden. He pulled his encrypted phone from his tailored suit pocket and dialed a private number. "I need a full comprehensive background check on Declan immediately," the senator instructed the private investigator on the other end of the line. "Dig into every single financial record, every bank account, and every trust fund connected to that family. Something is very wrong here, and I want the absolute truth on my desk by tomorrow morning." The morning sun rose over the historic Hamptons estate, casting a warm golden light across the manicured lawns. From the outside, the wedding preparations looked absolutely flawless. Dozens of florists were meticulously arranging towering arches of imported white roses. A string quartet was warming up on the sprawling stone terrace. Inside the bridal suite, Iman was surrounded by a swarm of makeup artists and hairstylists. She stood before a gilded mirror wearing her custom designer gown, sipping expensive champagne and projecting the image of a perfectly poised high society bride. She believed she was marrying into incredible wealth. She believed her future was secure. Down the hall in the groom's suite, the atmosphere was entirely different. The illusion of perfection was rapidly cracking. Declan stood by the window, sweating profusely through his custom-tailored tuxedo shirt. He gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He kept refreshing his banking application, hoping desperately for a miracle. The accounts remained completely frozen. The massive catering crisis from the previous night had been temporarily resolved by the senator, but the suffocating tension remained thick in the air. Declan knew he was walking a dangerous tightrope. Patricia and Richard paced nervously around the suite, trying to project their usual wealthy arrogance, but completely failing to mask their underlying panic. Richard kept checking his watch, while Patricia aggressively straightened Declan's collar. She muttered under her breath about how selfish I was for abandoning the family in their time of need. They were desperately clinging to the lie, refusing to acknowledge the massive financial sinkhole Declan had created. Declan took a shaky breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, practicing his confident billionaire smile. It looked strained and hollow. He told himself he just needed to survive the next few hours. He just needed to stand at the altar, say his vows, and slide the ring onto Iman's finger. Once the marriage certificate was signed, he would be officially tied to one of the most powerful political families in Washington. He believed the senator would protect him to avoid a public scandal. He believed he could trap them into paying off his massive hidden debts. He believed he was outsmarting everyone. Outside the window, the elite guests began to arrive. Black luxury town cars lined the lengthy driveway. Senators, congressional aides, and wealthy campaign donors mingled on the lawn, exchanging polite greetings. The heavy security detail swept the perimeter. Declan watched the senator walking the grounds, his posture stiff, his expression dark and unreadable. The senator was speaking quietly to a man in a dark suit. Declan felt a sharp, cold knot form in his stomach. He remembered the suspicious glare the senator had given him the night before. He knew the clock was ticking down. Suddenly, a heavy black armored vehicle turned through the wrought iron gates of the estate. It did not slow down for the valet attendants. It did not park in the designated guest area. The imposing vehicle bypassed the entire reception line and pulled directly up to the main entrance of the sprawling house. The sudden arrival immediately disrupted the elegant flow of the morning. The wedding planners stopped in their tracks. The security detail shifted their attention. Declan pressed his face against the window glass, his heart pounding erratically against his ribs. A courier stepped out of the armored vehicle. He wore a sharp black suit, dark sunglasses, and an earpiece. He looked like private military personnel rather than a standard delivery driver. In his right hand, he carried a sleek, heavy silver metal briefcase. The briefcase featured dual digital combination locks and a biometric thumbprint scanner. The courier bypassed the frantic wedding coordinators running toward him. He ignored the questions from the estate staff. He walked with absolute unwavering purpose directly toward the front doors of the main house. Panic seized Declan. His survival instincts kicked in, overriding his carefully constructed groom persona. He abandoned his parents in the suite, sprinting down the grand mahogany staircase and bursting through the front doors just as the courier reached the porch. Declan blocked the entrance, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically between the heavily secured briefcase and the armed driver standing near the vehicle. "I will take that," Declan demanded, thrusting his hand forward with false authority. "I am the groom. I handle all secure deliveries for the wedding party today. Hand it over immediately." The courier stopped. He did not flinch. He did not hand over the case. He looked at Declan with a cold, completely detached expression, measuring my brother's frantic, desperate energy. "I cannot do that, sir," the courier stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "This delivery requires a direct biometric signature from the senator. It is strictly classified." Declan felt his pulse thrumming violently in his ears. He tried to grab the handle of the briefcase, his facade of wealthy composure shattering completely. He raised his voice, demanding compliance, threatening to have the man thrown off the property. The courier smoothly stepped back, keeping the case entirely out of Declan's reach. "Let me be entirely clear," the courier continued, his tone dropping to a dangerous, uncompromising level. "I have strict instructions to bypass all wedding staff and family members. This package is for the senator's eyes only." It was sent as a special wedding delivery courtesy of Gia. Declan stopped breathing. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. His outstretched hand began to tremble violently. He took a slow, unsteady step backward. The mention of my name struck him like a physical blow. His mind raced back to the old discarded hard drives he had carelessly left behind in my apartment years ago. He thought they were destroyed. He thought his secrets were buried forever. He stared at the sleek silver briefcase resting firmly in the courier's hand. He suddenly realized the magnitude of the threat waiting inside. The ticking time bomb had officially entered the house. What exactly had I placed inside that box? Declan had exactly 45 minutes between the arrival of the armored courier and the moment the string quartet began playing the bridal march. That was 45 minutes of sheer, unadulterated psychological torture. He stood at the altar under a cascading canopy of white imported orchids, looking completely out of place. His custom-tailored tuxedo hung on him like a borrowed costume. The ocean breeze coming off the Hamptons coast was perfectly cool, yet heavy beads of sweat rolled continuously down his neck, soaking into his starched collar. The elite guests rose to their feet as the music swelled. Iman appeared at the far end of the manicured aisle. She was the absolute picture of bridal perfection, draped in custom Parisian lace, her face obscured by a delicate shimmering silk veil. She glided down the aisle toward a future she firmly believed was built on absolute financial security and high society prestige. But Declan was not looking at his beautiful bride. His eyes were locked in a frantic, terrified stare on the front row. Iman's father, the senator, sat rigidly in the seat of honor. He did not look at the extravagant floral arrangements or the weeping relatives. He sat with his spine perfectly straight, and resting squarely on his lap was the heavy silver biometric briefcase. He kept his large hands resting on top of the brushed metal, treating the mysterious delivery with the exact gravity it deserved. Every single time Declan tried to focus on the officiant speaking at the altar, his gaze was magnetically forcefully drawn back to that metal box. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his hands trembling so visibly that his best man actually had to reach out and steady him by the elbow. 12 time zones away, the sun was just beginning to set over the Indian Ocean, casting brilliant streaks of vivid purple and spun gold across the sky. The temperature in Bali was dropping to a comfortable breezy warmth, but my focus remained entirely icy and calculated. I sat on the edge of my infinity pool, my feet dangling in the cool crystal water, balancing my encrypted tablet on my lap. My public relations directors were all on the secure line, their faces tense and waiting for my final command. We had synchronized our digital clocks down to the exact second of the Hamptons wedding schedule. The package has been successfully delivered and is currently in the senator's physical possession, I announced to my team, watching the live digital feed from my security operatives stationed on the ground at the estate. We hold our positions for now. Wait for the reception to begin. David, my lead investigative director, adjusted his headset. The exclusive piece for the Washington Post is finalized, Gia. The editor is standing by and ready to publish. We have the financial wire logs, the IP addresses tracking the digital hack directly to Declan's specific devices, and the undeniable paper trail proving the massive embezzlement from the youth charity. Everything is locked and loaded. Are we absolutely sure we want to pull the trigger today? I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. Yes. When the senator opens that file, the press release goes live to the Washington Post immediately. We hit the wire before the senator has a chance to spin this into a misunderstood banking error or sweep it under the political rug. We control the narrative from the very first second. The senator will have no choice but to distance his family from Declan to save his own political career. We are providing him the exact surgical tool he needs to cut the cancer out. Back under the floral canopy in New York, the officiant began reading the traditional vows. Declan's voice cracked audibly as he repeated the sacred words. He sounded exactly like a man reading his own execution sentence. He wiped his forehead with a shaking hand, completely missing his cue to place the platinum ring on Iman's finger until she sharply, irritably nudged him in the ribs. Sitting in the second row, directly behind the senator, my parents watched the spectacle unfold. They saw Declan sweating profusely. They saw the heavy metal briefcase resting ominously on the senator's lap. But years of toxic denial and fierce, blind protection of their golden child blinded them to the brutal reality of the situation. They simply refused to believe that their perfect, successful son could ever be in genuine danger. Richard leaned over the polished wooden chair, his shoulder pressing heavily against Patricia. He kept his voice lowered to a harsh, dismissive whisper, completely ignoring the solemn vows happening just feet away. "Do not look so worried, Patricia." Richard murmured, a smug, arrogant smile playing on his lips. "Gia is bluffing. She is playing a ridiculous, desperate game to get attention. She does not have any real power or any real money. She is just trying to ruin his day because she is a bitter spinster who cannot stand seeing her brother succeed where she completely failed. Just ignore the briefcase. It is probably just empty paper meant to scare him." Patricia nodded sharply, taking a deep breath and forcing a bright plastic smile back onto her face. "You are right," she whispered back, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "She is just horribly jealous. Declan has everything. We will deal with her insolence after the honeymoon." They wrapped themselves tightly in their comforting delusions, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. The officiant smiled warmly at the couple. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Declan leaned in and kissed Iman. It was a brief, desperate, rigid gesture. The elite guests erupted into polite, restrained applause. The string quartet immediately transitioned into a lively, upbeat classical piece, signaling the end of the ceremony and the beginning of the lavish reception. Waiters appeared instantly from the garden paths, carrying silver trays of signature cocktails. The crowd began to shift, moving toward the massive climate-controlled tents erected on the back lawn. Declan tried to grab Iman's hand, trying to pull her quickly toward the safety of the reception crowd and the flowing champagne. But his eyes immediately darted back to the front row. The senator was not joining the happy procession to the tent. He stood up smoothly, bypassing the congratulations and the cheering relatives. Carrying the silver briefcase tightly by his side, the senator walked with absolute terrifying purpose toward the private study inside the main estate. Declan's heart stopped completely. The senator closed the heavy oak doors of the study behind him, blocking out the sound of the wedding music. He placed the briefcase squarely on the mahogany desk and pressed his thumb firmly against the biometric scanner. The heavy digital locks clicked open. The lid of the silver briefcase sprang upward with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside the quiet oak-paneled study, the senator reached into his breast pocket and retrieved his tortoiseshell reading glasses. He slipped them onto his face. He expected a vague threat. He expected a crude, amateurish demand for money. He expected the desperate flailing of an angry, estranged sister trying to cause a scene on her brother's wedding day. He did not expect a professionally bound 200-page corporate dossier. The document was thick. The document was heavy. The document was an absolute masterpiece of corporate crisis management. The cover page was printed on heavy watermarked cardstock from my firm. The bold black lettering at the top center of the page read, "Operation Severance." Below that, the subtitle clarified the exact devastating nature of the weapon I had just handed him. How to protect the senator's political campaign from Declan's embezzlement indictment. The senator stopped breathing. He read the title again. Embezzlement Indictment. The words burned into his vision. He slowly turned the heavy cover page, diving into the first tab section of the file. Page 1 was not a summary. Page 1 was hard, irrefutable, unarguable financial data. It contained official intercepted bank statements directly from Declan's supposedly massive wealth management accounts. The balances were zero. Every single account was completely drained. Every single credit card was maxed out to its absolute final limit. Declan was not a billionaire. Declan was not a millionaire. Declan was a complete and utter financial fraud. But the second page was what turned the senator's blood into pure freezing ice. It was a forensic accounting map. It tracked a series of highly sophisticated yet ultimately traceable wire transfers. The origin of the money was not a corporate bonus. The origin of the money was not a family trust fund. The origin of the money was the Washington Youth Advancement Initiative. It was the senator's own deeply personal, highly publicized, charitable foundation. Declan had systematically, ruthlessly siphoned $400,000 meant for underprivileged children in the capital. He had routed the stolen charity funds through 3 different offshore shell companies to hide the trail. He had used the stolen money to pay for Iman's massive blinding diamond engagement ring. He had used the stolen money to pay for the extravagant Hamptons estate rental. He had used the stolen money to pay for the very champagne currently being served to the elite guests just outside the study doors. The senator turned the page, his hands gripping the paper so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He saw the impending FBI indictment timelines I had mapped out. He saw the federal audit alerts that had already been triggered. He saw the exact date and time the federal authorities were planning to raid Declan's corporate office. Then he turned to the section labeled Immediate Public Relations Strategy. I had written out his exact survival playbook. I provided the drafted press release fiercely denouncing his new son-in-law. I provided the legal annulment paperwork for Iman fully drafted and completely ready for her signature. I provided the specific aggressive talking points he needed to deliver to the press to distance himself from the toxic radioactive crater that Declan was about to become. I handed him the exact blueprint to destroy my brother and save his own political empire. The strategy was ruthless. The strategy was immediate. The strategy required the total, highly public sacrifice of Declan. Outside the study, the reception was reaching its glamorous peak. The string quartet had been replaced by a 12-piece live band playing an upbeat jazz rendition of popular songs. Waiters circulated with silver platters of seared scallops and truffle risotto. The laughter of the wealthy guests echoed through the expansive, climate-controlled tents. At the head table, Patricia and Richard were holding court. They were sipping vintage champagne. They were actively boasting about their son's incredible wealth to a table full of powerful political donors. They were completely unaware that the money paying for the champagne in their hands was stolen from orphans. They were completely unaware that their golden child was a federal criminal about to bring down a dynasty. Inside the reception tent, Declan was drinking heavily. He knocked back a glass of straight bourbon, his eyes darting frantically toward the main house. He was sweating. He was shaking. He was vibrating with a terrifying primal panic. He knew the briefcase was open. He knew his entire fake reality was balancing on the edge of a razor blade. He tried to smile at a passing congressman, but his facial muscles twitched uncontrollably. Iman approached him, her custom designer gown catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. She placed a delicate, manicured hand on his rigid shoulder. "What is wrong with you, Declan?" she asked, her voice laced with sharp irritation rather than bridal concern. "You are sweating like a pig. You are embarrassing me in front of the minority leader. Go to the bathroom and fix your face right now." Declan could barely hear her over the roaring in his ears. He stared at the stone path leading back to the main house. The heavy oak doors remained firmly shut. Back in the study, the senator did not yell. He did not throw the briefcase across the room. He did not smash the expensive crystal decanter sitting on his desk. The absolute staggering betrayal demanded something far more severe than a simple emotional outburst. He read the documents one more time. He read the proof of his new son-in-law's absolute, unforgivable treachery. Declan had not just lied to his daughter. Declan had weaponized their family charity. Declan had put the senator's entire political legacy directly into the crosshairs of a federal investigation. The senator took off his reading glasses. He carefully, methodically placed them on the mahogany desk. He closed the heavy crisis playbook. He closed the silver biometric briefcase, the lock snapping shut with a sharp, final click. He stood up from the desk. His face was thunderous. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated fury. His face was the look of a man who had just decided to completely obliterate another human being from existence. The senator pulled his encrypted phone from his jacket pocket. He dialed his head of private security, a former Secret Service agent, who was currently stationed at the perimeter of the reception tent. The call connected instantly. "Lock down the entire perimeter," the senator commanded, his voice a low, lethal growl. "I want every single exit secured. I want the main gates barricaded. Do not let a single person leave this estate. Lock the doors of the reception hall from the outside. Trap them all inside." The senator ended the call and walked slowly toward the study doors, his hand resting on the cool brass handle. He prepared to walk out into the beautiful, perfect wedding reception and burn it entirely to the ground. The heavy oak doors of the study swung open, and the senator emerged into the manicured gardens. He walked with the heavy, measured tread of an executioner ascending the scaffold. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sprawling reception tent was now a glowing beacon of high society excess, illuminated by thousands of fairy lights and massive crystal chandeliers. Inside, the 12-piece jazz band was playing a lively, upbeat tempo. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. It was the absolute pinnacle of luxury. It was a complete lie. The senator caught the eye of his lead security agent standing near the main entrance of the tent. He gave a single sharp nod. Instantly, the private security detail moved with military precision. They quietly secured the perimeter. They pulled the heavy canvas flaps shut. They locked the reinforced glass doors of the temporary structure. The sharp metallic clicks of the deadbolts engaging echoed faintly over the music. Declan heard that sound. His stomach dropped into a bottomless void. He looked toward the exit and saw two massive men in dark suits standing with their arms crossed, blocking the only way out. He was trapped inside his own lie. The senator bypassed his designated seat at the head table entirely. He marched straight up the steps of the stage, his face carved from solid granite. He approached the band leader, raised a hand, and made a sharp cutting motion across his throat. The music ground to an abrupt, jarring halt. The sudden silence in the massive tent was deafening. The wealthy guests stopped laughing. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, expecting a heartwarming, emotional toast from the proud father of the bride. Patricia and Richard sat up straight at the head table, beaming with pride, ready to bask in the glow of their new political alliance. Iman smiled beautifully, adjusting her veil. The senator gripped the microphone. The speakers let out a sharp squeal of feedback that made several guests flinch. He did not smile. He did not offer a warm welcome. He looked directly across the room, locking his furious gaze onto Declan. "My daughter married a fraud today," the senator announced. His voice boomed through the high-end sound system, cold, hard, and utterly merciless. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Gasps erupted from the front tables. Iman physically recoiled, her smile shattering instantly. She stared at her father, her eyes wide with shock and utter confusion. Patricia let out a strangled, indignant noise, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Richard stood up halfway, his face flushing crimson, ready to protest this bizarre insult. But the senator did not give them a single second to react. He raised the stack of papers he had pulled from the biometric briefcase. He held them up for the entire room of politicians, donors, and elites to see. "This man sitting beside my daughter is not a billionaire." The senator continued, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "He has zero assets. His accounts are completely frozen. And worse than being broke, he is a common cowardly thief." Declan could not breathe. The walls of the tent felt like they were collapsing inward. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, his perfectly tailored tuxedo suddenly feeling like a suffocating straitjacket. The senator adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the documents. He began reading the wire transfer logs out loud. He read the exact dates. He read the exact routing numbers. He read the offshore shell company names. $400,000! The senator bellowed, his voice echoing off the canvas walls. Siphoned directly dollar by dollar from the Washington Youth Advancement Initiative. Declan systematically stole money meant for underprivileged children in our nation's capital to fund his pathetic illusion of wealth. He used stolen charity funds to pay for this extravagant tent. He used stolen charity funds to pay for the champagne you are all drinking. He used stolen charity funds to purchase the engagement ring currently sitting on my daughter's finger. Iman let out a sharp, horrified gasp. She looked down at the massive diamond on her hand as if it had suddenly caught fire. She ripped the ring off her finger and threw it violently onto the table. It bounced against a crystal wine glass with a sharp ping. She scrambled backward, shoving her chair away from Declan, looking at him with a mixture of terror and absolute revulsion. The reception hall erupted into absolute pandemonium. A chorus of outraged murmurs and shocked whispers swept through the crowd of political elites. Donors began pulling out their phones. Aides began texting frantically. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, her face pale and terrified, completely unable to process the destruction of her golden child's image. Declan snapped. His carefully constructed facade of arrogant wealth evaporated into raw, pathetic hysteria. He leaped out of his chair, knocking his champagne flute over. The expensive liquid spilled across the white linen tablecloth, pooling around the discarded engagement ring. He backed away from the head table, his eyes darting frantically around the locked room. He saw the security guards standing firm at the doors. He realized there was no escape. He looked wildly around the room and locked eyes with the wedding videographer's camera near the stage. In his deranged panic, he knew exactly who had orchestrated this execution. "It is!" Gia Declan screamed, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling, sweaty finger directly at the camera lens. "My crazy sister fabricated this entire thing. She is a toxic liar. She hacked those accounts to frame me. She has always been incredibly jealous of me. She is just a bitter, worthless spinster trying to ruin my life because she has nothing else. You have to believe me. She set me up to destroy our family." He looked at Iman, reaching his hands out toward her in a desperate, pleading gesture. Iman shrank back, tears ruining her perfect bridal makeup, completely disgusted by his pathetic display. The senator stepped down from the stage. The wealthy guests parted immediately, clearing a wide path for him. He walked slowly, deliberately toward the head table. He stopped directly in front of Declan. The towering politician looked down at the sweating, hyperventilating groom with an expression devoid of any human mercy. Gia did not just send accusations. Declan, the senator, said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register that carried perfectly through the silenced room. She sent the FBI tracking numbers. She sent the IP addresses proving these transfers originated from your personal devices. The senator gestured sharply to his lead security agent, who stepped forward, instantly pulling a pair of heavy plastic zip ties from his jacket pocket. "And she sent me the exact public relations strategy to save my family's name by handing you directly over to the federal authorities," the senator continued, shaking his head slowly. "The agents are currently waiting outside the main gates. You are entirely finished." The senator turned his broad back on Declan and gave a single sharp nod to his lead security agent. The heavy metal deadbolts on the reinforced glass doors of the tent clicked open in perfect unison. The doors swung wide, letting the cool Hamptons ocean breeze mix with the stifling, terrified silence inside the reception hall. Through the entrance marched 6 men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers. The bright yellow letters spelling FBI were printed squarely across their backs. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. They did not care about the towering arrangements of imported white orchids. They did not care about the elite high society guest list. They walked in a straight, unwavering line directly toward the head table. The crowd of powerful senators, foreign diplomats, and wealthy campaign donors immediately scrambled out of their way, pressing themselves against the canvas walls like water parting for a shark. The political elite smelled blood in the water, and their survival instincts told them to step far away from the blast zone. Declan stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the edge of the wooden stage. His breath came in short, jagged gasps. The lead federal agent stepped forward, his face a mask of absolute professional indifference, pulling a pair of cold steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "Declan Thomas," the agent stated, his voice easily carrying across the dead silent room. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Before the agent could read him the rest of his rights, a chaotic, screeching blur of expensive silk and pearls threw itself between the federal authorities and the groom. Patricia and Richard charged forward, their faces contorted with absolute unhinged denial. The illusion they had worshipped their entire lives was being dismantled in real time, and their minds simply refused to accept it. Patricia grabbed the lead agent by the sleeve of his windbreaker, her heavy diamond bracelets clattering loudly against his arm. "You cannot do this!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical, ear-piercing shriek. "You are making a massive, terrible mistake. He is a senior vice president of wealth management. He is marrying into the senator's family today. You cannot just march in here and ruin his wedding. You have no idea who we are." Richard stepped up firmly beside his wife, pointing an angry, shaking finger directly at the faces of the federal agents. "Arrest!" Richard bellowed, his face turning a dangerous, volatile shade of purple. "My daughter is a psychotic, jealous hacker. She fabricated those bank records. She set him up because she is a miserable failure who wants to ruin his success. He is entirely innocent. Go arrest her right now." The federal agents did not even blink. They had dealt with wealthy, entitled, delusional criminals before. The lead agent smoothly and forcefully detached Patricia's frantic grip from his jacket. He stepped around Richard as if the man were nothing more than a minor piece of inconvenient furniture. "Sir, step back immediately, or you will be charged with interfering with a federal investigation," the agent warned Richard, his tone dropping to a lethal, uncompromising level. The agent grabbed Declan by the shoulder, spun him around roughly, and forced his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs locking tightly around Declan's wrists echoed through the entire reception hall. The sound was permanent. The sound was undeniable. The golden child was officially in federal custody. Declan stood there, his custom-tailored tuxedo bunching awkwardly around his restricted arms. He looked out at the sea of faces staring at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. But the most disgusted face of all belonged to Iman. She stepped forward, picking up a full crystal flute of vintage champagne from the ruined head table. She walked slowly toward the man she had just married. Her eyes were dark, furious, and filled with a humiliated rage that burned hotter than the sun. She had been manipulated. She had been made a fool in front of her family and her father's political allies. Declan looked at her, his eyes begging for a rescue that was never going to come. Iman did not speak immediately. She looked at his sweating, pathetic, terrified face, measuring the absolute depths of his deception. "You made me force your sister to sign a contract because you said she was the liability," Iman said, her voice shaking with absolute venom. "You told me she was the embarrassing one. You told me she was the danger to my family." Iman raised the crystal glass and threw the cold, sticky champagne directly into Declan's face. The expensive liquid splashed violently across his eyes, running down his cheeks and soaking entirely into his starched white collar. He flinched, blinking rapidly, looking like a drowned, pathetic rat. "My lawyers will have the annulment filed before you even reach the police precinct," she added, turning her back on him completely, and walking over to stand firmly beside her father. The agents grabbed Declan by both arms and began frog-marching him down the center aisle of the reception tent. It was the ultimate, inescapable walk of shame. The exact same aisle he had planned to walk down as a triumphant, wealthy conqueror, he now walked down as a handcuffed, exposed, dripping wet fraud. The elite guests pulled their phones out, snapping high-resolution photos and recording videos that would inevitably be broadcast on every major news network within the hour. Declan kept his head down, the champagne dripping from his chin, his entire fake reality completely and permanently obliterated. Behind him, the tent descended into absolute chaos. Patricia collapsed into a gilded chair, wailing uncontrollably, ripping her carefully styled hair out of its pins. Richard was pacing frantically, shouting at anyone who would listen, demanding to speak to the chief of police, demanding to call the governor. Patricia pulled her phone from her clutch with trembling, manic fingers. She bypassed every other contact and dialed my number, her thumb pressing the screen so hard she nearly cracked the glass. She brought the phone to her ear, hyperventilating as she waited for the connection. Half a world away, the vibrant coral reefs of Bali sparkled brightly under the clear turquoise ocean. I was floating weightlessly in the warm, crystal water, adjusting my snorkeling mask and marveling at the bright, darting tropical fish swimming peacefully beneath me. The sun was warm on my back. The gentle current rocked me back and forth. On the teak deck of my private chartered catamaran anchored nearby, my encrypted phone sat safely tucked inside a waterproof bag. The screen illuminated brightly flashing Patricia's name over and over again. It vibrated against the fiberglass deck, dancing slightly with each incoming ring. Eventually, the call rolled over to voicemail. Patricia screamed hysterically into the receiver, sobbing, begging, and cursing my name all at once, leaving a frantic message that I would listen to later with a cup of hot tea. I kicked my fins, diving deeper into the beautiful, quiet blue water, completely at peace, letting it ring. I emerged from the ocean, shaking the salt water from my hair, and climbed onto the sun-baked teak deck of my private chartered catamaran. My assistant handed me a fluffy white towel and my encrypted tablet. It was morning in New York, and the digital world was entirely on fire. The media explosion was a thing of absolute terrifying beauty. Every major news network, every financial blog, and every political pundit was running the exact same breaking headline. The senator had executed my public relations playbook with absolute ruthless perfection. He had held a press conference at dawn, flanked by stern-faced FBI agents, projecting the image of a heartbroken but dutiful public servant who had uncovered a monster within his own ranks. He painted Iman as a traumatized victim of a sociopathic con artist. He praised the federal authorities for their swift action and pledged total transparency. He emerged smelling like a rose, completely separating his political brand from the radioactive fallout. Declan was ruined. His mugshot was plastered across the internet. His custom tuxedo wrinkled his face pale and stained with dried champagne. The articles detailed his horrific betrayal, breaking down exactly how he stole $400,000 from a charity meant for underprivileged youth. Financial pundits openly mocked his fake billionaire persona, dissecting his empty accounts and maxed out credit cards for the entire world to see. The sheer scale of his delusion was now public record. He was sitting in a federal holding cell denied bail because my dossier proved he was an active flight risk with a history of creating offshore shell companies. My crisis team had ensured there was no possible defense. The evidence was irrefutable. Declan was going to federal prison for a very long time, and the entire world knew it. My encrypted phone began to vibrate violently against the fiberglass deck. The caller identification displayed my father's private cell phone number. I took a slow sip of my iced hibiscus tea, let the phone ring twice, and pressed the green accept button. I did not say hello. I simply waited. The sound of my mother's hysterical sobbing instantly filled the earpiece. She was hyperventilating, her breath coming in ragged, ugly gasps. My father's voice cut through the chaos, booming through the speakerphone function on their end. "You malicious, psychopathic liar," Richard roared. His voice was shaking with an unhinged, violent rage. "You set him up. You framed your own brother. You planted those bank records to destroy him because you could not stand seeing him succeed." Patricia snatched the phone, her voice screeching at a pitch that forced me to hold the device away from my ear. "You ruined his wedding," she screamed. "You ruined his life. He is a senior vice president of wealth management. He is a financial genius. You are nothing but a pathetic, jealous college dropout who plays on computers all day. You hacked his personal devices. You faked those charity transfers to make him look guilty. We are hiring the best defense attorneys in the country. We are going to tell the FBI exactly what you did, Gia. We are going to see you locked in a federal cage for this." I listened to their delusion. It was staggering. Even now, with their golden child sitting in a federal detention center facing undeniable proof of grand larceny, they refused to see the truth. They were perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves, to completely sacrifice my freedom just to maintain the absolute fiction of Declan's superiority. They truly believed I was a failure. They truly believed Declan was an innocent victim. I waited for them to run out of breath. The silence on the line stretched out heavy and suffocating. Dad, I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through the tropical breeze. I did not forge his signature on those charity accounts. I did not force him to transfer those funds into offshore dummy corporations. The FBI has the biometric logs, the IP addresses, and the security footage from the banks. Your perfect son is a common thief. He stole that money to pay for the Hamptons estate, the designer suits, and the vintage champagne you were drinking yesterday. He is a total fraud. That is a filthy lie, Patricia shrieked. He has millions in private wealth management. He has nothing, I stated coldly, and neither do you. The silence on their end of the line was immediate and absolute. I leaned back in my lounge chair, watching the palm trees sway on the distant Indonesian shoreline. Since we are on the topic of money, I continued, my tone completely conversational. We should discuss your current living situation. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, his voice suddenly losing its aggressive edge, replaced by a sharp, creeping panic. Did you really think I only investigated Declan? I asked. Did you honestly believe I would look into his fraudulent finances and completely ignore yours? I know you took out a massive third mortgage on the family estate to help fund his early corporate ventures. I know you co-signed those predatory bridge loans because he convinced you his investments were a sure thing. I know you have missed the last 7 payments. Shut up, Patricia gasped. Richard, hang up the phone right now. Do not hang up, Dad, I warned. Open your laptop. Open your email right now. You should have received a certified digital notice from the bank this morning. I heard the frantic tapping of a keyboard. I heard Richard's heavy, uneven breathing over the speakerphone. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The bank had grown tired of their empty promises. The bank had initiated formal foreclosure proceedings on their beautiful, historic, untouchable family home. But the bank no longer owned the debt. I heard a sharp, terrified intake of breath, the sound of a man watching his entire world crumble into dust. What is this? Richard whispered, his voice completely devoid of its former arrogance. This says the foreclosure was finalized. This says the debt was bought out by a private holding company. It was, I replied smoothly. The bank was thrilled to unload the toxic asset. They sold the debt for pennies on the dollar. Who is Orion Holding Group? Richard demanded, his panic escalating into sheer terror. Who bought our house? I took another slow sip of my tea. Orion Holding Group is a subsidiary of my primary investment firm, I said. I bought the debt, Dad. The family estate has been bought entirely out of foreclosure. You no longer owe the bank a single cent. Patricia let out a confused, relieved sigh. You paid it off. You saved the house. I did not save your house, Mom, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. I bought the house. The deed is officially in my name. The new landlord is my LLC. You have exactly 30 days to pack your things and vacate my property. The silence that followed was absolute. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound coming through the encrypted phone was the ragged, uneven breathing of 2 people whose entire reality had just been atomized. Then the frantic, desperate clicking of a computer mouse echoed through the speaker. Richard was opening the attachments, tearing through the digital legal addendums of the foreclosure notice. Patricia, Richard gasped, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. The second mortgage, the commercial bridge loan we signed to back Declan's private venture fund. What about it? Patricia demanded, her tone shifting from rage to blind panic. He never made a single payment. Richard said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He defaulted 8 months ago. The bank seized the collateral. He used the house, Patricia. He leveraged the entire estate and he let it go into default. He stole from us. That is exactly right, Dad, I said, leaning back in my lounge chair and watching a pair of seabirds circle the clear blue sky. He drained the remaining equity from your home to fund his fake billionaire lifestyle. When the bank flagged the accounts for severe delinquency, my investment firm was notified. Orion Holding Group specializes in distressed assets. I bought the paper for a fraction of its value. I own the land. I own the structure. I own the roof over your heads. No, Patricia breathed out the words sounding like a death rattle. No, Declan would never do that to us. He is a good boy. He made a mistake. He made a calculated financial decision to bankrupt you, I corrected her smoothly. And I made a calculated financial decision to profit from it. The psychological collapse on the other end of the line was instantaneous. The aggressive screeching monster that had tormented me for my entire life evaporated. In its place was a sickeningly sweet, trembling, terrified woman. Patricia realized in a fraction of a second that her golden child was going to federal prison, and her scapegoat daughter held the keys to her survival. Gia, sweetie, Patricia said, her voice dripping with forced, desperate affection. The sudden shift in her tone made my skin crawl. It was the voice she reserved for wealthy donors and country club presidents. Do not call me sweetie, I replied, my voice turning to ice. But you own the house. Patricia continued, ignoring my warning, her desperation leaking through the fake warmth. That is wonderful news. That means the estate stays in the family. We are your parents. You have to let us stay. We have absolutely nothing left. The federal prosecutors are already moving to freeze all of our joint accounts because we co-signed those fraudulent loans. Declan's legal fees alone will completely bankrupt us. We need a top-tier defense team. You cannot throw us out on the street. We are your family. Family, I repeated, letting the word hang in the tropical air. That is a fascinating word for you to use right now. Where was this family loyalty when you forced me to sign an NDA to attend my own brother's wedding? Where was this family loyalty when you paid for his Hamptons estate while telling me I was a worthless dropout? You funded his fraud. You enabled his delusion. You sat at a head table paid for by stolen charity money and smiled for the cameras. We did not know, Richard pleaded, his arrogance entirely broken. Gia, you have to believe me. We had no idea he was stealing. We thought he was successful. We thought you were the one struggling. Please, you have to help us. We will lose everything. You already lost everything, I stated with absolute finality. You just refused to look at the ledger. Gia, please. Patricia begged, openly sobbing now. You cannot do this. Remember rule number 5 on Declan's wedding list? I asked, my voice perfectly level. Sit at the overflow table near the kitchen. Keep your head down. Do not embarrass the family. I suggest you start packing your designer bags right now. You have exactly 30 days to find an overflow apartment. I pressed the red button on the screen, cutting off Patricia's hysterical wail. I dropped the phone onto the teak deck. I let out a long, slow breath. The ocean breeze washed over me, carrying the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus. For the first time in 27 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations and cruelty was entirely gone. I had not just survived them. I had dismantled them. I had bought my freedom and their consequence in one single flawless transaction. I closed my eyes, letting the warm Bali sun heat my skin. I listened to the gentle lapping of the waves against the catamaran. It was the sound of absolute victory. 10 minutes later, the encrypted phone vibrated against the deck again. I frowned, opening my eyes. I expected it to be Richard calling back from a different number to beg for a lease extension. But the area code flashing on the screen was not from Boston or the Hamptons. It was a Washington, D.C. area code. I picked up the device, slid my finger across the screen, and brought it to my ear. Hello, I said cautiously. Gia, a deep, resonant voice replied. The voice was instantly recognizable. It was the same authoritative baritone that had commanded the reception hall and ordered the FBI raid just hours earlier. It was the senator. Senator, I replied, sitting up slightly, wrapping a white towel around my shoulders. To what do I owe the pleasure? I assume the federal authorities found everything they needed in the dossier. They found more than enough, the senator said. His tone was not angry. It was not accusatory. In fact, it held a distinct note of profound respect. The operation was executed flawlessly. My daughter's assets are fully protected. My campaign is entirely insulated. The press is currently treating us as the tragic heroes who aided a federal investigation. You delivered exactly what you promised. I am glad the crisis management strategy was effective, I replied smoothly. Effective is an understatement. The senator chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. You surgically dismantled a highly sophisticated financial fraud, orchestrated a flawless public relations pivot, and handed the FBI a conviction on a silver platter, all without leaving a single fingerprint. You are ruthless, Gia. You possess a level of tactical genius that is incredibly rare in my line of work. I appreciate the compliment, Senator, I said, but my business with your family is concluded. Perhaps the senator replied, his voice dropping into a serious business-like cadence. But I did not call to discuss my former son-in-law. I called because I am preparing for a highly contested re-election cycle next year. I am going up against opponents who play dirty, who hide their assets, and who employ crisis teams that are very good at burying the truth. I need someone who is better than them. I need someone who can dig up the bodies and burn the opposition to the ground. I smiled, looking out at the endless glittering horizon. I do not want to yell at you, Gia, the senator said, his voice filled with unwavering certainty. I want to hire you. Name your price. I did not answer the senator immediately. I let the warm ocean breeze wash over the microphone, giving him a moment to realize that I currently held all the leverage. I tapped the screen of my tablet, upgrading the encrypted voice connection to a secure video link. If we were going to negotiate a corporate alliance, I wanted to look the man directly in the eye. The video connected instantly. The senator was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk in his private study, the exact same room where he had opened my biometric briefcase just 24 hours prior. He looked exhausted, the lines around his mouth deepened by a sleepless night of intense damage control, yet his eyes were burning with a sharp, predatory energy. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. He told me his usual political fixers were absolute dinosaurs. They were reactive and slow. They wrote polite press releases, organized weak apologies, and waited for the media cycles to dictate their survival. I, on the other hand, was proactive. I had weaponized the truth before the scandal could even break. He explained that by handing him the crisis playbook alongside the evidence, I had allowed him to control the narrative completely. I had isolated the cancer and protected the host. He told me he represented a powerful faction in Washington, a coalition of politicians and corporate leaders who constantly faced cutthroat opposition. They needed someone with my specific brand of ruthless efficiency. Before I could state my terms, a second figure stepped into the video frame. It was Iman. She looked entirely different from the glowing, haughty bride I had seen in the engagement photographs. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, simple knot. Her face was scrubbed entirely clean of makeup, leaving her looking pale and bruised by the staggering public humiliation of the previous night. The massive, fraudulent diamond was noticeably absent from her hand. She pulled up a heavy leather chair beside her father and looked directly into the camera lens. She did not offer weak excuses. She did not try to justify her past behavior. She owned it completely. I owe you a massive apology, Gia Iman said, her voice steady, but laced with a raw, humbled sincerity. I judged you from the very beginning. Declan told me you were a toxic, jealous grifter who was constantly trying to steal his hard-earned money. He painted you as a psychotic liability to our family, and I was arrogant enough to believe him without question. Iman looked down at her hands for a moment before meeting my eyes again through the screen. When my father read those bank statements on the stage, my entire reality collapsed. She continued, her voice tightening with residual anger. I realized Declan was planning to drain my family's accounts the exact same way he drained your parents' equity. He was going to use my name, my father's connections, and my trust fund to float his fake empire. You did not just expose a fraud yesterday, you saved my life. I accepted her apology gracefully but firmly. I told her we had both been targeted by the exact same narcissist. Declan was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to exploit the ambitions and insecurities of the people around him. He played a very long, very dangerous game, but I simply chose to flip the board. The senator placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder and took control of the conversation once more. He got straight to the business at hand. He offered me a flat, multi-million-dollar annual retainer to serve as the exclusive crisis manager and strategic consultant for his political action committee in Washington. It was an astronomical sum, the kind of untraceable high-level corporate money that would instantly propel my firm into the absolute highest echelon of federal power players. I looked at the senator through the screen, my expression perfectly neutral. I told him I would accept the contract under one non-negotiable condition. I required absolute operational autonomy. I would not ask permission to investigate threats, and I would not seek committee approval to neutralize his political enemies. If he hired my firm, I was the undisputed architect of his survival, and my strategies were not up for debate. The senator did not even blink. He smiled a genuine, terrifying smile of a man who knew he had just acquired the ultimate weapon. He agreed to my terms instantly. We finalized the verbal agreement expanding my corporate empire from high-level distressed real estate into the lethal arena of federal politics. The video call ended. I set the tablet down on the warm teak deck of the catamaran and signaled my assistant to bring me a fresh glass of iced hibiscus tea. I stretched out on the plush lounge chair, listening to the gentle rhythm of the Bali ocean lapping against the hulls. My firm had just secured a contract that guaranteed generational wealth. I had completely isolated my toxic parents, acquired their historic estate, and established an unbreakable alliance with one of the most powerful families in the country. The sun was high and bright, casting a brilliant turquoise glow across the water. It was a perfect afternoon. Then the secure line buzzed again. I glanced down at the screen. The caller identification did not display a name. It displayed a generic automated institutional number. It was the federal holding facility in New York. I picked up the phone and pressed the green accept button. An automated mechanical voice informed me that I had an incoming collect call from an inmate at the county jail. I calmly approved the charges. The line clicked hollow and echoing with the sterile metallic background noise of a federal detention center. Gia Declan said. He was not shouting. He was not projecting his usual arrogant, booming corporate voice. He was not demanding respect or threatening to destroy me. He was weeping. His voice was cracked, desperate, and stripped of every single illusion he had ever built. He was finally truly terrified. Gia, please. Declan sobbed his breath, hitching painfully into the receiver. The public defender says the judge is going to deny my motion for release. They are going to transfer me to the maximum security block. Please, you have the money now. I know you bought the house. I know you have the capital. Please, you have to post my bail. I will forward my standard retainer agreement to your chief of staff. Senator, I replied, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who held all the cards. My firm requires a $5 million initial deposit, non-refundable, and complete operational autonomy. I do not ask permission to destroy your political rivals. I simply hand you the ashes. The senator let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed through the secure connection. The contract will be signed within the hour. Welcome to Washington, Gia. The video feed cut out, leaving the screen of my tablet black and reflecting the bright, endless blue of the Bali sky. I handed the device to my assistant, who immediately swapped it for a freshly cracked coconut resting on a bed of crushed ice. I took a slow, refreshing sip of the cool water. My corporate empire had just expanded from distressed real estate into the highest, most lethal echelons of federal politics. I had dismantled my toxic parents, acquired their historic family estate, and secured a multi-million-dollar political alliance all before lunch. Then my encrypted phone vibrated against the teak deck of the catamaran. I glanced down at the screen. The caller identification did not display a name. It displayed a generic automated institutional number. It was the federal holding facility in New York. I picked up the device and pressed the green accept button. An automated mechanical voice informed me that I had an incoming collect call from an inmate at the county jail. I calmly approved the charges. The line clicked hollow and echoing with the sterile metallic background noise of a federal detention center. Gia Declan said. He was not shouting. He was not projecting his usual arrogant, booming corporate voice. He was not demanding respect or threatening to destroy me. He was weeping. His voice was cracked, desperate, and stripped of every single illusion he had ever built. The reality of his situation had finally crushed his massive, fragile ego. I will do anything, Gia Declan begged, his voice hitching painfully into the receiver. I will issue a formal public apology. I will get down on my knees in front of the press and tell them you are the smartest person in our family. Just get me out of here. The public defender says the judge is going to deny my motion for release. They are going to transfer me to the maximum security block. Please, you have the money now. Mom called me before they took my phone privileges. She told me you bought the estate. You are rich. I know it now. You have the capital to post my bail. You have to save me. I leaned back in my plush lounge chair, listening to the frantic hollow echo of the county jail through the receiver. The sound of slamming metal doors and distant angry shouting formed the perfect acoustic background to his absolute misery. The contrast between my reality and his was absolute. You sent me a very specific email last month, Declan. I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. You gave me 5 strict conditions if I wanted the privilege of attending your wedding. I had to wear beige. I was forbidden from speaking to the senator or his colleagues. I was ordered to sit at the overflow table near the kitchen. You dictated exactly how I was allowed to exist in your presence. I am sorry. Declan sobbed, the sound pathetic and wet. I was stressed. I was not thinking clearly. I was just trying to protect my image. Well, now I only have one condition for you, I continued smoothly, ignoring his pathetic excuses. One single rule you must follow if you want me to wire your bail money to the federal court. Anything. Declan gasped eagerly, his desperation making him sound manic. Name it. I swear to God, Gia, anything you want. I want you to confess to the judge, I stated, my tone dropping to a lethal, uncompromising level. I want you to go on the official public court record and admit exactly what happened to my college tuition fund 10 years ago. The line went dead silent. The frantic, desperate begging vanished, replaced by the heavy, suffocating silence of a man who realized his deepest, darkest secret had just been exhumed. I spent 5 years listening to Mom and Dad call me a pathetic, lazy dropout. I continued, my words striking like physical blows. I spent 5 years working 3 different minimum wage jobs. I scrubbed floors at midnight. I waited tables until 2 in the morning. I slept in my freezing car between shifts. I destroyed my physical and mental health trying to pay for classes because the university suddenly told me my accounts were empty. Mom and Dad claimed it was a catastrophic banking error. They claimed the market crashed and the trust dissolved. But we both know that is a lie, do we not, Declan? Gia, please, Declan whispered, his voice trembling with a new kind of terror. We do not need to bring the past into this. That was a long time ago. I was just a kid. Confess, Declan, I demanded, sitting up straight, the anger I had buried for a decade finally rising to the surface. Tell me exactly how you stole my future. Tell me right now, or I hang up this phone and let you rot in maximum security. He cracked. The remaining fragments of his ego shattered under the terrifying reality of federal prison. I took it, Declan sobbed, breaking down into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. I forged Dad's signature on the trust transfer documents. I drained your entire educational fund. Why? I demanded coldly. I needed the capital, Gia, he cried. I had secured an unpaid internship at a top-tier wealth management firm in Manhattan. I needed a luxury apartment in the city to look the part. I needed bespoke suits. I had to take clients out to expensive dinners to build my network. I had to look like I belonged there. If I looked poor, they never would have hired me. I thought I could pay it back once I made partner. And Mom and Dad found out I stated. It was not a question. Yes, he wept. They found the empty accounts 6 months later, when the bank sent the annual statements. I begged them not to report me. I told them a felony fraud charge would ruin my career before it even started. I promised them my new job would pay millions and I would elevate our entire family's status. They agreed to cover for me. They agreed to tell you it was a banking error. They sacrificed your education to protect my reputation. I am sorry, Gia. I am so sorry. I am a monster. I admit it. I stole your tuition. I ruined your life. Please. I confessed. I did what you asked. Now please wire the bail money. I cannot survive in here. I looked down at the recording interface active on my encrypted tablet. The digital audio waves of his full, uncoerced confession were safely captured. The file was already backing up to 3 separate cloud servers and automatically forwarding to my legal team. I had the ultimate proof. the final piece of the puzzle that completely vindicated my past and utterly destroyed the narrative my parents had used to torture me for a decade. They had knowingly watched me suffer, working my fingers to the bone while protecting the thief who stole my future. I smiled, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of peace settle over my entire being. "Thank you for the confession, Declan," I said, my voice light and airy. "It is going to make a fascinating exhibit at your sentencing hearing." "What?" Declan gasped, the panic returning instantly, his voice cracking in terror. "You said you would pay my bail. You gave me your condition." "I said I had one condition for your bail," I corrected him smoothly, picking up my coconut water. "I never actually said I was going to pay it." "Enjoy the prison food, Declan." I tapped the red button, cutting off his frantic screaming, and let the phone drop onto the deck. Half a world away, the brutal reality of my actions was tearing through Boston high society with the destructive force of a hurricane. Richard and Patricia had spent their entire adult lives meticulously cultivating an image of untouchable, aristocratic wealth. That entire illusion evaporated the exact moment the federal asset freeze hit their accounts. I received the comprehensive report from my firm's intelligence division later that evening, detailing their spectacular public downfall. Desperate to maintain the facade and secure emergency capital, my parents had driven their leased Bentley directly to the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was their ultimate social sanctuary. They intended to corner their wealthy peers, spin a tragic fabricated story about a temporary government misunderstanding, and secure a private unsecured bridge loan to hire Declan's defense team. They never even made it past the mahogany host stand in the main lobby. The club manager, a man who had practically bowed to my father for over 20 years, intercepted them with cold, calculated efficiency. He loudly informed them that their membership dues were in severe arrears and their black cards had just been globally declined. When Richard tried to bluster his way through the interaction, invoking his decades of elite loyalty and threatening to have the manager fired, the man simply signaled for security. My parents looked around the opulent lobby for help. Their so-called friends, the powerful senators and corporate CEOs, who had gladly drank their vintage champagne at Declan's wedding just days prior, physically turned their backs. Conversations abruptly stopped. Eyes were averted. No one offered a single dime. No one offered even a whisper of a sympathetic word. They were escorted off the premises by two burly guards in front of the entire dining room. It was the ultimate, soul-crushing humiliation. Sitting in the leather seats of their unpaid luxury car in the country club parking lot, the terrifying truth finally pierced through Patricia's lifelong delusion. She realized with absolute clarity that they had spent 30 years worshipping a sociopathic con artist while actively destroying the only daughter who possessed the actual genius to save them. Declan was never going to rescue them. He was going to drag them down into a sprawling federal indictment. I was their only remaining lifeline. But Richard and Patricia did not know how to ask for help or seek genuine forgiveness. They only knew how to demand obedience. Panic breeds profound irrationality, and my parents were drowning in it. With their cash seized and their credit lines entirely dead, they frantically logged into their airline accounts. They liquidated every single frequent flyer mile they had hoarded over the decades to purchase 2 economy-class tickets to Indonesia. They knew exactly where I was. The Senator's crisis team had leaked strategic details of my new operational base in Bali to the financial press to build my firm's formidable mystique. My parents truly believed that if they could just get in the same physical room with me, they could exert their old, overbearing parental authority. They fully intended to crash my sanctuary, guilt-trip me about family duty, and brutally bully me into signing over the funds to clean up Declan's monumental mess. They endured 30 grueling hours of cramped, miserable travel. They were forced to sit in the very back of the aircraft, wedged tightly between crying infants and overflowing lavatories, entirely stripped of their usual first-class privileges. By the time they finally landed in Denpasar, they were physically exhausted, severely dehydrated, and wearing wrinkled, stained clothes that smelled of stale airplane air. They had absolutely no money for a private air-conditioned car service. They were forced to ruthlessly haggle with a local taxi driver to take them to the sheer cliffs of Uluwatu, where my new compound was securely located. My primary residence was not a simple breezy beach house. It was an ultra-luxury fortress carved directly into the ancient limestone cliffs, accessible only by a single winding private road. I had purchased it specifically for its absolute impenetrable isolation. The taxi driver dumped them at the bottom of the long driveway, unable and unwilling to pass the first security checkpoint. Richard and Patricia were forced to drag their own heavy, cumbersome designer luggage up the steep, sun-baked asphalt. The equatorial heat was absolutely merciless. Sweat poured down Richard's red, angry face, staining his expensive collar. Patricia's perfectly styled hair clung to her forehead in damp, pathetic strands, her impractical shoes blistering her feet with every step. They marched up the punishing hill, fueling their exhaustion with righteous indignation, fully expecting to burst through my front door, scream at me for my disrespect, and demand I fix their shattered lives immediately. They finally reached the crest of the hill, panting desperate and ready to unleash their fury. But there was no welcoming mahogany front door. There was no easy, unhindered access. They found themselves staring up at a massive 12-foot-high gate forged from solid black steel. 4 private military contractors stood in strict formation in front of the barricade. They were dressed in black tactical gear, heavily armed with assault rifles and wearing encrypted earpieces. These were not the soft, compliant country club security guards Richard was used to intimidating. These were highly trained, lethal professionals whose only job was to ensure my absolute peace of mind. Richard dropped his heavy suitcase, his chest heaving violently, and marched right up to the closest guard. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to summon the ghost of his former corporate authority. He aggressively demanded entry. He shouted that he was Gia's father and that I was expecting them. The lead guard did not even blink. He simply raised a gloved hand, stepping directly and firmly into Richard's path, and informed him that he was trespassing on private property. Inside the heavily air-conditioned command center of the villa, I sat in a plush leather chair, slowly swirling a glass of sparkling water. A glowing wall of high-definition security monitors displayed every single angle of the perimeter. I watched Richard shouting silently on the screen, his face contorted in impotent, pathetic rage. I watched Patricia leaning heavily against her luggage, looking utterly broken, exhausted, and terrified, as the armed guards refused to yield a single inch. They had traveled 10,000 miles to demand my absolute submission, only to be stopped cold by a steel wall and the crushing reality of my new power. I pressed the intercom button on my console. The heavy steel gates groaned open. I instructed my security chief to escort them to the main atrium, but to strictly leave their luggage outside. They did not need it. They would not be staying long. I walked out of the command center and stood at the top of the floating glass staircase that overlooked the grand lobby of the villa. The space was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring a cascading indoor waterfall, soaring teak ceilings, and panoramic walls of glass that framed the endless expanse of the Indian Ocean. Richard and Patricia stumbled through the massive pivoting doors. They looked entirely broken. Patricia's designer resort wear was soaked with sweat, her expensive silk pants stained with the dust of the driveway. Richard was hyperventilating, his face a dangerous, unhealthy shade of crimson. They stopped in the center of the polished marble floor, staring up at me. Patricia spotted me standing at the top of the stairs. Instantly, the exhaustion vanished from her face, replaced by a perfectly rehearsed mask of maternal anguish. She collapsed to her knees on the imported marble, burying her face in her hands, and began to sob violently. The pristine acoustics of the grand atrium amplified her theatrical wails. "How can you do this?" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "How can you sit up there in this absolute palace, while your own flesh and blood rots in a federal cell? We are sleeping in airports, Gia. We are completely homeless. Your brother is terrified. He is locked in a cage with violent criminals. And you are sitting on a private beach drinking champagne. You are a monster. You have absolutely no heart." I did not flinch. I slowly descended the glass staircase, the rhythmic click of my heels cutting through her hysterical sobbing. I took my time letting them feel the absolute shift in power with every step I took. When I reached the bottom step, I stood towering over them. "Do not ever speak to me about having a heart," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Let us talk about your heart, Mom. Let us talk about the time I won the National Coding Championship in high school, an achievement that came with a full academic scholarship. You did not even show up to the ceremony. You told me it was a waste of time and that I should focus on finding a rich husband because I was not pretty enough to get by on my looks." I took a step closer. Richard tried to intervene, but I silenced him with a single lethal glare. "Let us talk about this fact that you allowed Declan to steal my college tuition fund," I continued, my words striking them like physical blows. "You knew he committed felony fraud. You knew he drained my accounts to buy bespoke suits and rent a Manhattan penthouse so he could play pretend on Wall Street. You watched me work 3 minimum wage jobs until my hands bled. You watched me sleep in my freezing car between shifts just so I could afford textbooks. You told me it was a catastrophic banking error and that I needed to learn the value of hard work. You actively protected a thief and sacrificed your own daughter to preserve the illusion of your perfect golden son." They both froze. Patricia's fake sobbing stopped instantly. They realized I had the full confession. The secret they had meticulously guarded for a decade was dead. The silence in the atrium was absolute, save for the sound of the indoor waterfall. "You spent my entire life treating me like a shameful secret," I said, circling them slowly on the marble floor. "When I started my first tech company, Richard told his golf buddies I was a glorified customer service representative. When I bought my first apartment, you told everyone I was renting it with money you generously provided. You forced me to sign a non-disclosure agreement just to attend my own brother's wedding. You banished me to an overflow table next to the kitchen because my presence did not fit the aristocratic aesthetic you were trying to sell to the senator. You worshipped a parasite because he knew how to wear a tuxedo and order expensive wine, and you threw me away." Patricia scrambled to her feet, her hands reaching out toward me in a desperate, pathetic gesture of supplication. "Gia, we made mistakes," Patricia pleaded, her voice shaking with genuine terror now. "We were blind. We were foolish. But we are here now. We flew across the world to make it right. We love you. We need to heal this family." I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just the cold, clinical precision of someone observing a parasite looking for a new host. "You did not come here because you love me," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You came here because your ATM broke and you just realized I am the bank." The undeniable truth of my words hit Richard like a physical strike. The last remnants of his fake fatherly concern vanished, replaced by the cornered, aggressive arrogance he had used to bully people his entire life. He stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving. "Enough of this disrespectful nonsense," Richard roared, his face turning purple again as he tried to summon his old authority. "I am still your father. You will show me some goddamn respect. You bought the debt on our estate. You own the paper. Hand over the deed right now. You are going to sign that house back over to us today, and you are going to wire Declan's bail money to his attorney by the end of the hour. We are family, and you owe us." I looked at the red-faced, sweating man, demanding my obedience in the center of my fortress. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply reached into the pocket of my linen trousers and pulled out a single neatly folded document. "You want a piece of paper, Dad?" I asked, extending my hand. "Here." Richard snatched it from my grip, his eyes gleaming with greedy, desperate triumph. He thought he had won. He thought his sheer volume and parental authority had finally broken me. He aggressively unfolded the heavy parchment, expecting to see the legal transfer of his multi-million-dollar Boston estate. He looked down at the printed text. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled in the quiet room. He read the words again, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "This is not the deed to the house. Richard whispered, his voice completely hollow and devoid of all arrogance. I smiled, stepping back toward the glass staircase. No, I replied smoothly. It is something much more important. Richard's eyes darted frantically across the crisp, heavy cardstock. He was searching for legal jargon, property boundaries, and immediate transfer clauses. Instead, his bloodshot eyes locked onto a brightly colored corporate logo at the top center of the page. It was the emblem of the most exclusive, outrageously expensive catering conglomerate on the East Coast. His hands began to tremble as he read the itemized lines. $5,000 for beluga caviar stations. $3,000 for imported white truffles. $7,000 for an open bar featuring exclusively vintage champagne. It was the final staggering invoice for Declan's lavish wedding reception. The exact same wedding where I was ordered to wear beige, sit silently by the kitchen doors, and avoid making eye contact with their important guests. What is this? Richard breathed, the paper shaking furiously in his grip. Why are you handing me a catering bill? Look at the guarantor signature line at the bottom, Dad. I instructed, my voice echoing off the soaring teak ceilings of the atrium. He lowered his gaze. His jaw dropped open. There, scrawled in dark blue ink, was his own unmistakable signature. I did not sign this, Richard sputtered, his voice rising in sudden breathless panic. I never agreed to underwrite this expense. Declan told me the bride's family was covering the food and beverage costs. He swore to me it was handled. He lied, I stated, simply enjoying the absolute devastation washing over his face. When the federal agent started closing in on his fraudulent accounts last week, Declan panicked. He realized his credit lines were about to be frozen, so he forged your signature on the final vendor contracts to ensure his perfect aristocratic wedding went off without a hitch. He threw you under the bus to save his own social event. He used you as a human shield. Patricia let out a sharp, wet gasp. She grabbed the invoice from Richard's shaking hands, her eyes scanning the total amount due. $15,000. To a billionaire, it was pocket change. To a man whose bank accounts had just been federally seized and whose credit cards were globally declined, it was a terrifying death sentence. You told me to pay this to earn my plate, I reminded them, my tone laced with glacial satisfaction. You sent me a highly detailed, humiliating email the day before the wedding. You suggested that if I wanted the privilege of eating the food provided, I should offer to cover the catering costs, since I was otherwise completely useless to the family image. You literally told me that my only value was my checkbook. Well, now you have to pay it to avoid another massive civil lawsuit. The catering company is highly aggressive. They have already threatened to file a lien against whatever remains of your frozen estate. Enjoy the debt. This is insane, Patricia shrieked, clutching the invoice to her chest, as if trying to hide the terrible numbers from existence. You are a billionaire, Gia. You can pay this with a single phone call. You can make all of this go away. We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything. You cannot simply hand us a bill and walk away. I watched her desperate, pleading eyes. She was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to play the victim card while standing in the middle of the empire I built from the ground up. You gave me nothing, I stated, my voice cutting through the lavish room. You gave Declan everything. You gave him your trust, your money, and my future. And in return, he threw you to the wolves the second his own life was threatened. You did not come here because you love me. You did not endure a 30-hour flight in economy class because you suddenly realized your parenting mistakes. You came here because your ATM broke and you just realized I am the bank. But my vault is securely locked. I checked the slim platinum watch on my wrist and turned my back on them, giving a sharp, definitive nod to the heavily armed security chief standing by the entrance. The guard instantly tapped his earpiece, signaling the tactical team outside. My flight to DC leaves in exactly 1 hour, I said over my shoulder, walking purposefully toward the private glass elevator that led to my rooftop helipad. DC. Richard echoed, confusion temporarily overriding his panic. Why are you going to Washington? I have a private dinner meeting with the senator, I replied smoothly. We are finalizing the operational details of our new political alliance. The same senator you explicitly forbade me from speaking to at the wedding. The same man whose career you tried to buy but whose loyalty I have completely secured. I am taking over your world, Richard. I am sitting at the head of the table you so desperately wanted to own. You guys can find your own way back to the airport. Gia, wait! Richard roared, his voice cracking with unprecedented desperation as the security guards took a synchronized step forward. You cannot do this. You cannot leave us here. We spent our last frequent flyer miles to get here. We do not have a single dollar. The bank froze everything. We have no cash. We have no credit. We do not even have a way to pay the taxi driver waiting at the bottom of the cliff. I stepped into the glass elevator, turning around to face them one last time as the doors began to slide shut. Then I suggest you start walking, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I hear the walk from Uluwatu to Denpasar builds excellent character. The thick glass doors sealed shut with a soft final hiss, cutting off Richard's frantic shouting. Through the transparent walls of the elevator shaft, I watched the final inevitable collapse of the empire they had built on lies and favoritism. Patricia stared blankly at the massive steel security doors separating her from the sweltering tropical heat outside. The reality of their absolute destitution finally crushed her. She had no black card. She had no luxury concierge. She had no subservient daughter to bully into submission. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, the $15,000 catering invoice slipping from her fingers. She fell forward, weeping openly and uncontrollably, the sound muffled by the thick glass of my ascending elevator. She was a woman stranded 10,000 miles from home, with absolutely nothing to her name, completely shattered by the realization that their ignorance had finally cost them everything. The ascent to the rooftop helipad was smooth and silent. I stepped out of the glass elevator into the humid Bali air, the roar of the helicopter blades already whipping my hair around my face. I did not look down at the villa. I did not look back at the parents I had just left stranded in their own catastrophic mess. I simply boarded the chopper and gave the pilot a single nod. Within 20 minutes, I was walking across the private tarmac of Ngurah Rai International Airport. The senator had spared absolutely no expense. Waiting for me was a Gulfstream G65, its sleek white exterior gleaming under the equatorial sun. The tail number was registered to his primary political action committee. This was not just a flight. It was an escort fitting a conquering general. I boarded the aircraft, greeted by a private attendant who immediately handed me a glass of sparkling water and a hot towel. I settled into the plush leather seat and opened my laptop. For the next 20 hours, while crossing oceans and continents, I did not sleep. I meticulously reviewed the strategic rollout for the next phase of my empire. When the jet finally touched down at Dulles International Airport, the Washington sky was crisp and clear. I stepped off the aircraft onto the tarmac dressed in a flawless tailored charcoal suit that commanded absolute authority. A blacked-out armored SUV was idling near the steps, flanked by the senator's personal security detail. I slid into the back seat, feeling the profound, undeniable shift in my reality. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was no longer the awkward, socially unfit sister ordered to sit by the kitchen doors and remain invisible. I had arrived in the capital of the free world as the most powerful person in the room. The motorcade rushed me directly to the heart of the city, bypassing traffic with ruthless efficiency, and pulled up to the rear entrance of a prestigious convention center near Capitol Hill. Inside, the grand ballroom was packed. A sea of reporters, flashing cameras, and national news anchors murmured in eager anticipation. I bypassed the main floor and was escorted straight to the VIP holding room behind the main stage. The senator was waiting. Beside him stood his wife Iman, a formidable woman whose philanthropic influence shaped global policy. They both turned as I entered, their expressions lighting up with genuine, profound respect. "We are ready when you are," Gia, the senator, said, extending his hand. I shook it firmly. "Let us give them a show." The heavy velvet curtains parted. The senator and Aman walked out onto the brightly lit stage, approaching the podium as a wave of camera shutters erupted like a strobe light storm. I stood in the wings, perfectly concealed in the shadows, listening to the senator's booming, authoritative voice fill the auditorium. He spoke passionately about accountability, about tearing down the toxic, corrupt structures of corporate greed that had infected modern finance. It was a thinly veiled, utterly devastating public repudiation of everything my brother Declan represented. Then Iman took the microphone. She announced the launch of a massive multi-billion-dollar ethical charity initiative designed to restructure global corporate accountability. But an initiative of this magnitude requires a leader of unparalleled strategic brilliance, Iman announced, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. It requires someone who knows how to dismantle corruption and build sustainable, untouchable success. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce our new lead crisis director and chief strategist. I stepped out from the shadows and walked to the center of the stage. The applause was deafening. The flashes from the press pool temporarily blinded me, but I did not flinch. I stood at the podium looking out over the sea of journalists. I delivered a concise, lethal, and perfectly calibrated speech about transparency and the ruthless pursuit of corporate integrity. I controlled the room with effortless precision. Every word I spoke was absorbed, recorded, and broadcasted live to millions. The public vindication was absolute and instantaneous. By the time I walked off that stage, the narrative was entirely mine. Major financial networks interrupted their regular broadcasting to analyze my speech. Prominent analysts dubbed me a strategic genius, a rising titan who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere to completely dominate the political and corporate landscape. The valuation of my private firm skyrocketed within hours, the stock market reacting to my newly cemented alliance with the senator's powerful coalition. Articles began flooding the internet. They detailed my rise from a self-made entrepreneur to a political powerhouse. There was no mention of my parents. There was no mention of my brother's fraudulent legacy. I had completely erased their ability to define me. The ridiculous, insulting label of being socially unfit was obliterated, replaced by headlines praising my commanding presence and ruthless intellect. I had not just taken a seat at the table. I had bought the entire building and fired the previous owners. Later that evening, I was relaxing in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, reviewing the incredible analytics of my firm's growth on my tablet. The city lights of Washington sparkled outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, a glittering testament to my victory. A soft knock at the heavy wooden door broke the silence. My personal assistant stepped into the suite carrying a silver tray. A single thick envelope rested on top of it. "This was just delivered by a private courier," she said, her tone serious. It was flagged as urgent and highly confidential. I took the envelope. The return address belonged to a notoriously expensive, high-powered criminal defense firm in Manhattan. I dismissed my assistant and slid my finger under the flap, tearing it open. I pulled out a crisp, formal letter printed on heavy legal stock. It was from Declan's lead attorney. The arrogance that usually characterized their legal correspondence was completely gone. Instead, the letter was a desperate, groveling proposition. It outlined a comprehensive plea deal. Declan was willing to turn over all of his hidden offshore accounts, surrender his remaining physical assets, and publicly testify against his co-conspirators. He was offering complete and total surrender, but the deal hinged on one single critical condition. The attorney was begging me to release the unedited audio recording of Declan's confession to the federal prosecutor, hoping my cooperation might secure a slightly reduced sentence for his client. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page, realizing that the golden boy of the family was officially begging for his life, and I was the only one holding the keys to his cage. The proposal outlined on the heavy legal stock was as insulting as it was desperate. Declan's attorney had attached a highly specific addendum, attempting to leverage what little bargaining power they mistakenly believed they still held. If I agreed to permanently withhold the unedited audio recording of his confession from the federal prosecutors, and if I formally dropped my civil lawsuits regarding my stolen college tuition and the Boston estate, Declan would graciously surrender his remaining hidden assets. The inventory list was pathetic. He was offering me 3 vintage Rolex watches, a minor stake in a commercial shell company, and a 50-foot yacht currently docked in Miami. He was trying to buy his freedom with the very toys he had purchased using stolen money. He still thought like a privileged frat boy trying to bribe his way out of a parking ticket, completely oblivious to the fact that his currency was entirely worthless. The next morning, I convened a strategic war room meeting in the glass-enclosed boardroom of my new DC headquarters. My legal team was a ruthless, highly compensated assembly of former federal prosecutors and forensic accountants who specialized in aggressive asset recovery. I tossed Declan's proposal onto the center of the polished mahogany table. My lead counsel, a sharp, uncompromising woman named Sarah, skimmed the document and let out a cold, dismissive laugh. I did not hire Sarah to negotiate or find common ground. I hired her to conquer. We immediately drafted our counteroffer, which consisted of exactly 2 words: absolute denial. We were not going to settle, and we were certainly not going to hide evidence. Instead, Sarah filed an emergency federal injunction to seize the watches, the yacht, and the shell company. We initiated a comprehensive legal maneuver to redirect every single liquidated asset directly into the senator's new ethical charity fund. We were going to ensure Declan paid back every dime he stole from the public and from me, leaving him with absolutely zero leverage and nothing to his name. 6 weeks later, the crisp autumn air of Washington felt incredibly refreshing as I walked up the massive marble steps of the federal courthouse. The media presence was completely overwhelming, a chaotic sea of microphones and satellite trucks. But the senator's personal security detail carved a seamless, quiet path for me through the flashing cameras. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The air smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. I took my seat in the gallery and looked at the defense table. Declan sat slouched in a wooden chair, and he looked absolutely unrecognizable. The bespoke Italian suits, the expensive haircut, and the arrogant, untouchable smirk were completely gone. He was wearing an ill-fitting standard-issue beige prison jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. Because Richard and Patricia were completely bankrupt, their assets frozen, and their social standing obliterated, Declan's expensive Manhattan legal team had immediately dropped him for non-payment. The golden child of the family was now represented by an overworked, exhausted public defender who looked like he had barely slept in a week and had met his client only minutes before the hearing began. The judge, a stern, unyielding man with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, read the damning charges aloud. His voice echoed through the silent room, citing the irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. He detailed the staggering financial damage Declan had caused to countless innocent investors. And then the federal prosecutor introduced the final piece of evidence: the unedited audio recording of Declan weeping in the county jail, explicitly confessing to forging documents and stealing his own sister's college tuition to fund a fraudulent luxury lifestyle. The recording played over the courtroom speakers, loud and undeniable. Declan's pathetic, sobbing voice filled the space, stripping away the final shreds of his fabricated reputation. There was no banking error. There was no market crash. There was only a greedy, desperate thief stealing from his own family to buy expensive dinners and look the part. Declan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably as his ultimate humiliation was entered into the permanent public record. The judge did not hesitate or offer a single word of sympathy. He bypassed the minimum sentencing guidelines entirely. He cited Declan's complete lack of remorse and the predatory nature of his crimes, handing down a devastating, ruinous sentence. 15 years in maximum security federal prison without the possibility of early parole, followed by lifetime financial restitution. The heavy strike of the judge's gavel sounded like a gunshot. 2 federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Declan by the arms and hoisting him to his feet. They clamped heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, the metallic click echoing sharply in the quiet room. As they turned him around to lead him toward the holding cells, Declan stopped. He dragged his feet, desperately scanning the packed gallery. His terrified, tear-filled eyes darted through the crowd. He was looking for his mother. He was looking for his father. He was looking for the parents who had shielded him from every consequence his entire life, hoping they would suddenly appear and buy his way out of this nightmare. But they were gone, ruined by their own blind loyalty. His frantic gaze finally landed on the second row. I was sitting comfortably, perfectly poised between Iman and the senator. Declan stared at me, his face a mask of absolute horror and pleading desperation. He was waiting for me to react. He wanted to see anger or triumph or even hatred. He wanted to know that he still mattered enough to elicit an emotional response. I did not smile. I did not glare. I simply looked back at him with total, absolute indifference. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom clicked shut behind Declan, cutting off his frantic, searching gaze. I did not blink. I did not shift in my seat. Iman simply adjusted her designer silk scarf, and the senator checked his expensive watch. We stood up in perfect, unbothered unison and walked out into the crisp Washington air, leaving the ruined, weeping remnants of my brother behind us forever. 300 miles away, the reality of my absolute victory was settling over Richard and Patricia like a suffocating layer of toxic dust. Their multi-million-dollar Boston estate was a distant, painful memory. It had been aggressively liquidated and seized to satisfy the massive civil judgments, the federal fines, and the ruthlessly pursued catering liens I had meticulously orchestrated. They now lived in a cramped, poorly insulated two-bedroom apartment in a neglected, decaying suburb of New Jersey. The walls were paper-thin, the carpet smelled faintly of old dampness, and the aristocratic silence they had once enjoyed had been permanently replaced by the constant grinding noise of a nearby interstate highway. Richard, a man who used to terrorize corporate boardrooms and bully local politicians, now spent his days wearing a stiff, brightly colored synthetic vest at a massive commercial home improvement warehouse. He spent 8 grueling hours a day, standing on aching arthritic knees, directing confused contractors to the plumbing aisle, and enduring the barked, disrespectful orders of a shift manager exactly 40 years his junior. Customers yelled at him over misplaced inventory. Teenagers mocked his slow, shuffling gait. The sheer physical exhaustion of manual labor was nothing compared to the psychological torture of total, undeniable irrelevance. He was a ghost of a tyrant trapped in a brightly lit retail hell. But Patricia's fate was a far more exquisite, perfectly tailored form of justice. The woman who had ruthlessly obsessed over designer labels, country club gossip, and the absolute destruction of anyone who did not fit her flawless aesthetic was now working the checkout lane at a harsh, fluorescent-lit discount grocery store. Her uniform was a cheap, itchy polyester polo shirt that clung to her in all the wrong places. Her once perfectly manicured hands were now calloused, dry, and cracked from handling cold produce and snapping open cheap plastic bags. Every time the automatic sliding doors of the supermarket opened, Patricia physically flinched. She spent her entire shift terrified. Her eyes darted frantically up and down the linoleum aisles, paralyzed by the paralyzing fear that one of her former high society friends might wander in on a road trip and witness her spectacular, humiliating fall from grace. She lived in a constant state of agonizing shame, a prisoner of her own shattered ego. Meanwhile, I was breathing the rarefied electric air of the stratosphere. I stood looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse office in downtown Washington, D.C. The sprawling space was a physical testament to absolute power. Polished obsidian floors, minimalist leather furniture, and a panoramic corner view that perfectly encompassed the Capitol building and the soaring Washington Monument. The heavy glass door to my inner office swung open, and Iman strolled in. She looked magnificent, radiating the kind of effortless, lethal authority that only comes from genuine purpose. She bypassed my assistant entirely, walking straight to the sleek, wet bar hidden in the corner of the room. She poured us each a generous measure of aged single malt scotch, her movements precise and completely relaxed. She handed me a heavy crystal glass. We clinked them together, the sharp, clear sound echoing off the glass walls of the massive room. There was no animosity between us. There was no lingering jealousy, no suspicion, and no petty rivalry. Declan had desperately tried to pit us against one another, assuming we were just two foolish emotional women fighting for his scraps of attention and his stolen money. Instead, His arrogant manipulation had backfired spectacularly. He had inadvertently introduced the architect of his demise to the architect of his replacement. Iman and I had built an impenetrable fortress on the ashes of his ego. She was currently running the most heavily funded, radically transparent, and ruthlessly ethical charity initiative in the country, and I was her heavily armed shield protecting the foundation from predators and crushing anyone who dared to challenge our authority. We had forged a bond of genuine, unshakable mutual respect. Our partnership had elevated my firm to a level of dominance I had only ever dreamed of in my cramped college dorm room. The morning edition of the Wall Street Journal sat on my desk, featuring a massive full-page spread detailing the meteoric rise of my agency. They had officially named us the top crisis management and public relations firm in the United States. I was no longer just a wealthy tech founder or a lucky investor. I was the supreme arbiter of the corporate narrative. If a billionaire CEO faced a scandal, they begged their board to hire me. If a politician stepped out of line, they prayed I would not take the opposing side. I was completely undeniably untouchable. I controlled the stories, I controlled the money, and I controlled the power. Iman finished her drink, offering a warm, congratulatory smile before heading off to a classified meeting at the Treasury Department. I sat down at my massive desk, feeling a profound, quiet sense of closure. The war was definitively over. The empire was secure. My intercom buzzed with a soft chime. My executive assistant stepped into the office carrying a small stack of physical mail that had somehow bypassed the digital screening process. She placed the letters precisely on the corner of my desk, gave a polite nod, and quietly exited the room. I flipped through the stack of heavy embossed envelopes from senators, tech billionaires, and global philanthropists. Near the bottom of the pile, a stark, glaring anomaly caught my eye. It was a cheap, flimsy paper envelope, the kind you buy in bulk at a discount pharmacy. There was no return address printed on the corner, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was erratic, shaky, and desperate. It was Patricia's handwriting. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt thin and pathetic against my fingertips. I slid my heavy silver letter opener under the flap and pulled out a generic mass-produced holiday card. The printed message inside wished the recipient a season of joy and forgiveness. Below the stamped text, Patricia had filled every available inch of white space with cramped, frantic writing. She detailed the freezing temperatures in their new apartment. She wrote endlessly about Richard's failing health and her own crushing depression. She begged me to remember the good times, fabricating memories of family warmth and maternal love that had never actually existed. The final line was heavily smeared, clearly stained with a wet teardrop. She was begging for a second chance. She was pleading for financial rescue, asking me to find it in my heart to forgive them, to forget the past, and to bring them back into the fold of my luxurious new life. I stared at the desperate weeping ink. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt absolutely nothing at all. I calmly stood up, walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder humming quietly in the corner of my office, and dropped the card into the steel teeth. I listened to the satisfying mechanical grind as their final plea for mercy was reduced to meaningless, forgotten strips of paper. The mechanical grind of the industrial shredder slowed to a satisfying stop. I looked down at the transparent plastic bin. Patricia's frantic, tear-stained holiday card was officially gone, reduced to a chaotic pile of meaningless paper ribbons. "We are family. Please let us come see you for Thanksgiving." Those were her exact words, crammed desperately into the margins of cheap, mass-produced cardstock. The sheer audacity of the word family coming from her pen was almost staggering. But just moments before I dropped her pathetic plea into the steel teeth of the machine, I had actually entertained the idea of a response. On my immaculate obsidian desk sat a thick piece of custom-pressed ivory cardstock. My platinum fountain pen rested beside it. I had spent exactly 3 minutes drafting a list of demands. It was a flawless, legally binding ultimatum containing 5 non-negotiable conditions for Richard and Patricia to earn a single seat at my Thanksgiving table. Condition 1 required a public sworn affidavit acknowledging their direct complicity in covering up Declan's financial crimes. Condition 2 demanded the repayment of every single cent stolen from my college tuition fund, with compound interest deposited directly to the ethical charity initiative I now managed. Condition 3 was a signed legal agreement renouncing any future claim to my assets, my companies, or my estate. Condition 4 mandated a written unconditional apology for 29 years of systemic emotional abuse to be published in the Sunday edition of the Boston Globe. Condition 5 was the most specific. If they met the first 4 demands, they would be allowed into my home, but they would sit at a plastic folding table in the kitchen hallway and eat whatever cold leftovers remained after my real guests had finished. I picked up the heavy ivory cardstock. The dark blue ink was perfectly dry. It was a ruthless, perfectly calibrated corporate strike. It was exactly the kind of brutal power play Richard used to admire before he became the victim of one. I read the 5 conditions again, imagining the absolute horror on their faces when they opened the envelope. Then a low, genuine laugh bubbled up in my chest. The sound echoed in the vast, quiet emptiness of my penthouse office. It was not a bitter laugh. It was the sound of absolute liberation. I looked at the list of demands and realized how entirely absurd it was. Why was I negotiating with emotional terrorists who had already surrendered? Why was I setting terms and conditions for people who had absolutely nothing left to offer me? They did not have the money to pay me back. They did not have the platform to publish an apology. They did not even have the bus fare to travel from New Jersey to Washington, D.C. I realized in that exact moment that sending this list would mean I still cared about their submission. It would mean I still craved their acknowledgement. It would mean I was still letting their ghosts occupy valuable real estate in my mind. I did not need their apologies. I did not need their public humiliation. I picked up the heavy ivory cardstock, walked back over to the humming machine, and dropped my flawless ultimatum straight into the shredder. I watched my 5 perfect conditions get ripped into confetti, joining Patricia's holiday card in the trash bin. I did not need to fix my parents. I did not need to punish them anymore. I just did not need them at all. 2 weeks later, the crisp autumn air settled over Washington, D.C. I stood at the head of a massive custom-built dining table in the historic Georgetown brownstone I had purchased outright with cash. The soaring dining room was a masterpiece of warm, inviting architecture. The smell of roasted sage brown butter and expensive cedar firewood filled the air. Golden light radiated from the crystal chandeliers overhead, illuminating a room packed with vibrant, uninhibited joy. This was my Thanksgiving. Iman sat to my right, looking incredibly regal in a deep emerald gown. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back at a joke told by Sarah, my lead corporate counsel. The senator sat across from them, actively pouring a vintage Bordeaux for the security chief, who had flawlessly escorted my parents off the cliff in Bali. Tech billionaires, brilliant strategists, and the most dedicated members of my crisis management team filled every other seat. There was no tension in this room. There were no silent expectations, no whispered criticisms about my appearance, and no walking on eggshells to protect a fragile golden boy's ego. No one was banished to an overflow table near the kitchen. Everyone in this magnificent room had earned their seat through loyalty, relentless competence, and genuine mutual respect. I looked at the faces of the people surrounding me. Iman caught my eye and raised her glass in a silent, powerful gesture of solidarity. The 2 of us, once targeted by the same manipulative parasite, had built an empire on his ashes. My public relations agency was setting national records. The ethical charity initiative was restructuring global corporate policy. I was completely, undeniably untouchable. I picked up a sterling silver spoon and tapped it gently against the rim of my Baccarat crystal wine glass. The clear, sharp chime instantly quieted the room. Dozens of powerful, brilliant faces turned toward me with absolute respect. I raised my glass of expensive, perfectly aged red wine, letting the firelight catch the deep crimson liquid. I did not think about the cramped, freezing apartment in New Jersey. I did not think about the beige prison jumpsuit in federal lockup. I thought only about the empire I had built and the incredible people sitting in my home. To family, I said, my voice carrying clear and steady across the lavish dining room. Not the one you are born into, but the one you build after the trash takes itself out. The most profound takeaway from this story is that biology does not entitle anyone to your endless sacrifice. When a family operates on conditional love, shielding a toxic golden child while demanding the scapegoat fund, their illusions, the healthiest response is a hard boundary. True power is not merely financial dominance. It is the absolute freedom to define your own worth and reject the damaging narratives forced upon you. You are never obligated to rescue those who actively engineered your downfall. Real family is built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and shared values, not guilt manipulation or bloodlines. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relationships to protect your own peace? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story of claiming your power and building your chosen family resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering journeys of sweet revenge, resilience, and self-discovery.